love here. But Matthew 5:43 says, "You have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy." You may be thinking, what in the world does that verse have to do with siblings? But how many of you guys, maybe not today, maybe not yesterday, but at some point have viewed your sibling more as an enemy than a sibling? Right? No hands went up on that one, but I know you have at one point. All right, but let's set the stage here for a second. Jesus is talking to these people, whether they're along the shore on one of the boats or wherever they're at on this. I got to think when he said this, he probably got a lot of amens. Because back then, I know we're nice to people when they're nice to us, right? But are we always nice to people when they're mean to us? You guys have heard the saying, "Help me to help you." All right, remember the series the one before this, when we talked about friends. We talked about it was compared to Facebook, how we accept, respond, or ignore our friends. And when we were talking about responding, we talked about why are we in the relationships? Are we in them for us? Or are we in them to serve others? But that's kind of what we do, even with our family or our siblings. We treat them how they treat us. All right? But did Jesus do that for us? We used the example of when he washed the disciples' feet, then when he ultimately went to die on the cross. All right? He didn't. If he would have treated us in accordance to how we treated him, then he would have never have came. Right? But because he forgave and served us, he gave us an ultimate example of what to do. But like I said, I got to say, when Jesus said this, the people were probably on board. He was getting some amens. They poured out their white hankies and, were doing the wave. All right? But he takes it a step farther. All right? Don't you just love when you hear the verse and it sounds good, and then Jesus adds that one word or that, that next verse in that completely changes the whole picture of it. So we're going to read verse 43 again, and then we'll read the rest of it. It says, "You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you," this is Jesus talking, "love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so you may be sons of your Father in heaven." You may be thinking, again, you don't know my sibling. You don't know what they've done to me. You don't know how miserable they make my life. You may say, honestly, I forget to pray for my friends half the time that I like, and now you're telling me I have to pray for my sibling. It's not going to happen. All right? I know we're all there. Our siblings can be annoying. I have a sibling. All right? I know they can drive you nuts, but we're going to look at an example here before you head on. Have you guys ever, I know you're with your friends, you're hanging out, and your sibling comes along and wants to hang out, right? You hate it, all right? 'Cause my sister and I were far enough apart that didn't happen a lot, all right? But, man, you just want them to go away. But how many of you guys know that sometimes how we treat other people, especially those in our family, especially our siblings, don't just affect them then, but they affect them down the road? You guys see these people in school, whether they're on drugs or they just act weird and messed up and you don't know why? Well, if you had a look at their family life, you would probably answer a lot of questions, right? We don't know when we speak love into our siblings, especially as the older siblings, how that's going to give them confidence. But when we tear them down, we talked about, we inflict wounds on people. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. But when we do that to our siblings, we're tearing them down and we don't realize what kind of effect that has on them. And I want to tell you guys a story of a guy named Dave. Dave was an 11-year-old boy that had polio and cystic fibrosis. Have you guys ever heard of those?
No.
Polio is a disease that affects your spine. All right, it can be a crippling disease. And cystic fibrosis is a disease that it gives you really thick mucus and it messes up your lungs. So this guy had both. So obviously he's not doing real good. His brother, okay, of course, as Dave is crippled and can't do much. His brother is a junior in high school star basketball player. All right, so it would be very easy for Dave not to accept his brother, just push him out of the picture, right? It's what most people probably did. But every weekend, every Saturday, there was a group of about 25 neighborhood boys that met at the basketball court at the park, and they would always shoot for captains. Whoever made the first 2 foul shots was the captain, and then they would pick teams. Obviously, when you're the captain, you want to pick the people who are going to help you win, right? Like I said, I'm competitive. Like even at the youth retreat, when we were picking teams for the games, I was picking, it wasn't against anybody else, but I was picking the people who I thought were going to help me win, and I still lost. All right, so you reap what you sow, I guess. All right, but it's our nature. We want to be competitive, right? Paige reminded me that her team still beat me anyway. All right, but Dave, of course, he's a star basketball player. He hits it. He's a captain. He's looking around, and his little brother, not Dave's brother, not Dave, but Dave's sitting off, waiting for his brother to pick whoever the best player is that's going to help him, and he looks. He says, I got Dave. And of course, this is probably going to make him lose, but he reaches out and sees his brother there, and he says, I got Dave. And Dave comes up. He's this awkward, crippled boy. He comes up to his big brother and wraps his arms around him and buries his head in his chest and just begins sobbing. Why? Because he was accepted. His brother looked He said, you know what? This may not be popular, but I love you. And even though that you have flaws, I still accept you. And how many times do we look at people and we don't accept their flaws because we're afraid what it'll do to our image? Now, I want to be straight with you guys. I'm guilty of it. I've done it before. I remember there was times in school where to get accepted, you may laugh at one of your friends. But looking back, we know what was done to you. That kind of stuff hurts, right? How many of you guys have been back here before when I shared, the story of, what led to me quitting the baseball team after the one season, right? I was in band, and these are guys, they may not be your brothers, but you play with them since Little League, in a sense, they are your brothers, You're with them all the time, all right? Here, I'm in band, and playing baseball, and it wasn't the cool thing to do, right? And they start, hassling me. They would make fun of me when I got to practice, and it got to the point that, I had to miss a few games because we had band stuff going on or whatever. And the players had complained to the coach that I wasn't pulling my weight, which is fine. I'm not there, so, I did the extra running I had to do for missing the practices and games or whatever. But a couple of the upperclassmen, I was a sophomore at this point, had some of the other sophomores waiting, and as I came into the locker room, they kind of ganged up and dogpiled me and just kind of, threw a couple punches and whatever. And I went out and told Mom and Dad, I said, I'm done. I said, I'm not playing anymore. They said, you want us to, we can go tournament? I said, no, just let it go. It's over with. All right? But I went through a season, those are your buds. Those are your teammates. Those are your brothers. I had to forgive. All right? Did they deserve to be forgiven? No. But like we talked about, I don't deserve to be forgiven. All right? There's times when there's people, whether we're an only child, and it's the people that are close to us that, that we have to forgive, or maybe it is our siblings that really, they hurt us. We have to forgive them. All right? Just like that story with Dave and his brother. How awesome is that? When we look, how many of you guys have ever actually gone up to someone just at lunch, and said, hey, come eat with us today? Or maybe your sibling is struggling, and maybe instead of going out with your friends, you're the popular one in the family. Instead of going out with your friends on Friday night, you said, I want to stay home and hang out with my brother tonight. I want to stay home and hang out with my sister tonight because they're going through a hard time. Right? And yeah, it's inconvenient, and sometimes it's not cool. All right, but that's what Jesus did for us, right? So you may still be sitting here completely not sold on the fact, and you would say, but if Jesus knew the condition of my family, we're a totally blended family, it's messed up, nobody gets along, I'm the freak show, I'm the oddball, he would understand that I can't do this right now. And you would say, but Jesus didn't come from his family wasn't broken up, he doesn't know what I'm talking about. But let's backtrack for a second. Did Jesus have siblings?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. But then his siblings, we know that Jesus, obviously he was born of the Virgin Mary, but was Joseph his actual father? No. Well, he was his earthly father, but he wasn't his biological father, right? So were Jesus' siblings his full siblings, or were they half-siblings? They were half-siblings, right? So he knew what it was like to come from a blended family. Do you think that Jesus was the oddball in the family? We know the Bible says, he that knew no sin became sin, so we may become the righteousness of God. Did Jesus know what it was like to be the outcast? Have you guys ever gotten jealous and it's caused fights among your siblings when, your parents say, well, why don't you listen as good as your brother? Why don't you listen as good as your sister? Jesus never sinned, so did he always obey his parents? Yeah. If it was modern day, you just think, hey, Jesus, take out the trash, please. All right, Mom. All right, Dad. They say, well, hey, come help us clean up the kitchen. Well, let me finish what we need you now. Okay, I'll come now. And I can just imagine the picking now. Now, listen to Jesus. He's the mama's boy. All right, he always does what he's told. All right, so before we go and say, well, Jesus can't relate to me on this subject, actually, yeah, he can. Because we know that we have a high priest talking about Jesus, and I'm paraphrasing here. It's not word for word. But who was tempted and tried in every way. All right, so if you're struggling with something in your family, Jesus faced it. All right? So we can actually ask, well, what would he do if he was in this situation? We can say, Jesus, what did you do when you faced this? Help me out here. All right? So now it's the fun part, though. We know how we're supposed to relate to our siblings, but now how do we apply it to our life? Right? This is always the fun part where the rubber meets the road, how we have to go and live it out. All right? I know last week we talked about men sometimes admitting that you're not always right in your family. It's nasty, right? You'd rather kiss a toilet seat. Right? As nasty as that can be, it's how unfun that giving up your right to be right can be, especially when it's your parents or your brother or sister, whoever it may be. But some of you are here today and you need to go back and say to your sibling, you know what? I'm sorry. I mistreated you. Some of you may be thinking, get a life, dude. I'm not doing that. If you knew what they, no, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to go admit that I was wrong, because then we'll just rub it in my face and go and tell mom and dad, look, so-and-so, they admitted that they were wrong, and then you're just going to say, well, your parents will just pat your other sibling on the back and say, we know you're the good one, but just forgive them, right? Or maybe you're here, and instead of going and apologizing, you need to forgive. And again, you're saying, hold up, no, I'm not forgiving. The way that they messed up my life, maybe your parents have been divorced, and maybe you put the blame on your sibling. Everything was fine until they started going through this, or until they started driving mom and dad nuts. Maybe you put the blame for stuff that's happened in your family on them. You say, no, I'm not forgiving. God can, He's just going to have to keep that one because I'm not doing it. One thing we can do, we can pray for him. You say, well, okay, I'll pray for him, but I'm not doing anything more. But, something else we can do, tell him just one time, say, I love you. You're saying, no way. Not only is that like garbage coming out of my mouth, but they don't deserve it.
No.
All right? It can be hard, siblings, or it can be annoying. They can hurt us. But, if we want, here in the next couple of weeks, we're going to be starting up our campus missionary stuff again. And if we really want to reach out to our friends, all right, are we going to be as effective as we can to our friends if we're not taking care of the foundational stuff in our family? It's not going to happen. Even as I read something, even as a husband now, where this devotion was talking about, as a husband and as a man of your house, if your prayers aren't being answered, all right, and stuff's going wrong, go back and look at how your relationship, how you're interacting with your spouse. Okay, when stuff at the